The last thing I want to get your view on is simulation and diving, which seems to again be getting big headlines, particularly off the back of the Ollie Lawrence incident with Alex Mitchell, head-on-head contact in the Northampton Bath game. Lawrence dropped to his knees and then I think got more abuse actually for smirking at the yellow card to his England teammate more than anything else. He said off the back of it, in terms of my reactions during the game, I do smile after I make a mistake. It's something I've done my whole career. It's just my way of getting over it and moving on to the next big thing. It's why you're grinning permanently, isn't it? Just smiling from one mistake to the next.
Yeah.
What was interesting about this, though, is the Telegraph ran a poll saying, has rugby got a growing problem with simulation, yes or no? 65% yes, 35% no. I don't know who votes in these things or whether you stand by that. But give us your view. Are we seeing a bit more gamesmanship now in rugby creeping in, or is that just isolated incidents?
It probably is, if we're being honest. You can pull out 4 or 5 examples in the last couple of years where players have milked a situation. I think how good is that, though, that Ollie came out and recognised that he probably went a bit too far and put his hands up. That's what we're wanting referees to be. We're wanting referees accountable. So we want the players to be accountable too. And it's a good step forward. I think you've got to divide this issue into 2. I think simulation when nothing has happened is a total no-no, is wrong, is awful. And I don't see too much of that happening. It's a very hard topic so take the Ollie Lawrence one, for example. He has been hit in the head. So that can't be simulation. Maybe it's exaggeration, but it's not making something up because he's been hit in the head. So referees are in a little bit of a tricky scenario then, because we're still dealing with something that was foul play to begin with. We're not just taking a dive. I remember Nick White, was it 18 months ago, 2 years ago, when he got pushed over and fell to the floor? That's simulation.
Faf de Klerk, wasn't it?
It was, yeah. Down in Australia, wasn't it? But, when players actually get hit in the head or they have an act of foul play on them, it's very hard for referees to say, come on, get up. That's nothing. Because Ollie Lawrence got hit in the head and Alex Mitchell could have been lower. Where we just got to try and get to is we acknowledge that and see that on the pitch. And maybe we don't give that card if it doesn't really feel it, or we reverse decisions. We acknowledge that, yes, Ollie, you've been hit in the head here, but we see it as a penalty only, perhaps. However, your reaction is try to milk something, so we're reversing it. But it's a very hard scenario when it's not simulation, it's exaggeration.
Producer Tom came up with an idea, which I'll throw at you, where he said, if there's a head contact, should an HIA be mandatory? So when Ollie Lawrence dropped to his knees, should you say to him, well, that looked really bad, Ollie, you need to go off for 10 minutes and we'll see whether you're fit to come back? Or is that just making another it's beat a butterfly's wing, isn't it? Causing problems in other parts of the game.
I know as referees, we are fully supportive of that. Fully supportive. It would make sure that players are safe, because if you've been hit in the head and we explain it as highly dangerous and we're giving cards out and the player stays on the pitch, it raises the debate on how dangerous something is, doesn't it? However, it will probably reduce the amount of times that players are looking to get TMOs involved. And let's not be naive about it. Coaches and players know if they stay on the ground, TV are going to replay why they're on the ground. And if it has been hit in the head, then we're going to see it. So we got to get to somewhere where we're encouraging players not to look for decisions and have trust and faith in us that we will get the ones where they've been hit in the head illegally, or we've had something, then we will give the right level of sanction. But I definitely think it's crept in. It's something that's been discussed, and we really want to bring that automatic HIA for head contact if we're sanctioning that as foul play, which I think is really important, not just for simulation talk, not just for people milking penalties, but also for the safety of the player. We see players hit in the head sometimes and they don't remove off the field, and that can be worrying when you're in the middle of the ref thinking, God, a doctor said he's okay, and I'm not quite sure he is.
There seems to be a lot more appealing than there ever was before. Kind of, because you talked about sort of respect to the referee. I see a lot more kind of gesticulating and going to referee and kind of appealing for foul play because it's much more prevalent as opposed to just focusing on the job in hand.
Yeah, honestly, I don't hear as much as it at the moment. Like, I remember Hask when I was referee at the Rico and in Wasp's heyday, for example, and they had some big characters on that pitch, big characters. And
you mean Goody?
I mean, there's a lot of players that are on that park that were vocal. So we often forget sometimes, don't we, about some of the things in the past. But I definitely, and
What,
Chris
you
White,
mean I've got rose-tinted glasses of my own past and I'm pretending that I never did anything and that I'm whiter than white, is what you're trying to say, is that?
It's as we always say, like, well, when I did it, it was brilliant. That's how we always operate, isn't it? And you do tend to forget. On a semi-serious note, Chris White, one of our bosses at the RFU, is driving this values thing again and making sure that we are stamping on things. We got to make sure we get the balance right. We spoke about players' right to talk. There's a line that gets crossed in the sand occasionally, and we just got to make sure we're dealing with it when they do.
Well, the one thing I really don't want to ever happen to rugby is I talked about the referee's accountability. I think having a conversation and a dialogue and being a good communicator, not being intimidated on the field, and be able to, come back at lads and go, listen, I've seen it, I've looked at it, I'm not interested, go away. Or I heard your point of view, I didn't get it right, but adding that human element. But what I would never want to see is what happens at age group football or kind of grassroots football clubs where the coaches and the fans and the parents are calling the referee a CUNT and offering everybody, because it's so aggressive and so poisonous, and it comes down from the fact that at the Premier League and the top level of football, managers pretend they don't see it. People, they insult the referee. There's a reason why ref mics aren't put in the Premiership, because if you actually heard how the footballers spoke to the referees, you'd be mortified. I think rugby having that accountability, I think setting those precedents and the punishment for insulting a referee, I think is what keeps the grassroots clubs friendly, and actually the accountability from other parents when an adult or a parent insults a referee, you see them step in and say, no, this isn't football. We don't do this in rugby. No, that's not acceptable. I remember when Dyer Young was coaching us at Wasps, somebody tried to milk a penalty. I think dived. And he just turned up. We've replayed it 8 times. He was like, what the fuck are you doing here? There's no room for that. It's pathetic. Don't do it. And whereas a football player, someone like an Arsene Wenger back in the day would have pretended, I don't know, I didn't see it. I'll have to check the video. Yeah. That's quite a good Arsene Wenger impression. Yeah. So I think that's definitely the way to go, really, because otherwise it will tip over. And I'm glad that White is doing that. But as I said, it is a fine balance between being able to have a dialogue, be able to have a conversation, be made accountable, but without crossing the line and going, swearing at referee or intimidating or getting your space,
And let's not be, naive. Respect works both ways as well. We've got to make sure that we're speaking to players in a decent way. I go back to my example. I came back from the World Cup. I was a bit annoyed because, like I said earlier, the World Cup didn't quite go the way I wanted it to, and I was carrying that baggage still. And I refereed Saracens Bristol.
You said that twice. What was the?
Listen, it's just the way that the cookie crumbles. Selection is not something that is in anyone's domain when they're a performer, I guess. You're on the field and it's up to other people to pick you or not. And clearly I didn't do enough to convince people they should have picked me. So that's what I got to go back to the drawing board in the next, 2 more years now, or 2.5 bit more before Australia, and not just get on the plane, but get, some of the big knockout games. But I go back to that point about respect. And Owen Farrell and I, for example, I didn't speak to him in a respectful way, so he gave me a spray back. That when I walked away from that pitch, I thought that's my fault. I didn't speak to him in a respectful way. So we've got to make sure that we aren't seen in these godlike figures on a pitch, and making sure that we're untouchable, and making sure that we still drill that ability to have great relationships with people that will be tested at times. We work in a professional sport, don't we? People are going to win or lose. Some people lose their jobs. We got to understand that at times things will get heated. The understanding that also, when we're all grey and old and in our 60s, that if you see someone for a pint, then you may actually realise how hard the job was from both ends.